Okay, all right, I got it. Yes, ma'am. Okay. All right, thank you. Here you go.
Looking like you have nowhere to be.
Man, what you said. Uh, sir? Okay. So good evening, good afternoon to everyone. My name is Van Turner. I'm the former president of the Memphis branch of the NAACP, and I'm the state legal redress chair for the Tennessee conference of the NAACP. I was invited to attend this press conference by Representative Hardaway. We just met with the Department of Justice, and we received some vital information about its upcoming investigation into the potential unlawful practices of the Memphis Police Department. What they are conducting is called a pattern and practice investigation, and they're looking 5 years back to see what has occurred, what's the root cause of it, and what can be done to cure the situation moving forward. They'll look at three things: whether MPD uses unlawful force, whether MPD engages in discriminatory policing, whether MPD makes unlawful stops, searches, and arrests. You can add to this investigation, and if you have stories you need to tell to the Department of Justice, you have something that you need to share, you can go to community.memphis@usdoj.gov, and you can dial this phone number 888-473-3730, and there's a QR code too which will be shared. Along with J.A. Hardaway, the local branch, along with Josh Spickler, Just City, and many, many other concerned citizens, the Ben F. Jones chapter of the Bar Association, National Bar Association, we called for a pattern and practice investigation months ago. The DOJ came and met with a group of concerned stakeholders, and now they're back returning, indicating that they will conduct this pattern and practice investigation. It's the right thing to do. We as a city, as a nation, should never ever have to experience again what we saw in the death and murder of Tyree Nichols. It was a shame, there was a failure. We have to learn the root cause of that failure, and we have to work to make sure it never happens again.
I just want to say this is what victory and this is what success looks like. Today is victory. This is what we requested. We asked them to come and investigate because we felt that there were a lot of injustices going on here in Memphis, and so they heard our request and they have answered it. So today is just the first step, but we have a long way to go. So what we're going to be doing is we're going to be going to the community. This cannot be successful without the help of every one of our citizens. So if you know people who have suffered at the hands of the police, if you know people who have stories to tell, we are going to be working with the Department of Justice and their representatives, and we have already sort of a little task force, and we're going to be meeting at least monthly, hopefully, with the Justice Department to try to establish the parameters of how the investigation will go forward and to give our input on the investigation and to try to help them, because we know our city. We are the ones who knows what's going on here in Memphis, and so we have to help them. So we're going to ask the public, we're asking everyone for their support and passing the word along, because this is just the first step. Thank you.
I'm Josh Spickler. I'm the executive director of Just City. Last name is Spickler. Was happy to answer the call when G.A. Hardaway reached out several months ago now to support this community's request for a pattern or practice investigation, and we succeeded. And this is, as has already been said, just the very beginning. This has been happening in small rooms now for weeks and months. It's about to come out into the entire community. You heard the phone number, you heard the email address. You will hear so much more. You will have so many more opportunities as a community to give input into this process. It is the highest degree of investigation and oversight that the federal government can give to a police department. And so that's why it's a sad moment, but it's an encouraging moment. We have a lot of opportunity here as a community to get this right, so we don't see things like we saw with Tyree Nichols again. Just City was happy to support this effort to request this investigation with some data that we have been able to provide to this team, and are certainly in conversation with the folks at the Department of Justice already, and will continue to be in conversation with them as they dig through the history of this agency and plan for the future of the police department, and to make it a police department we can be proud of, a police department that keeps us safe, a police department that we can trust, and so that we as a community can come closer to the vision that Just City has for this city, and that is one where justice means one thing to everyone. It doesn't have two different meanings depending on the color of your skin. So happy to be here today, and thank you so much for having us.
Damon Griffin, that's D-A-M-O-N-G-R-I-F-F-I-N. I'm a pastor, local pastor here in Memphis, New Beginnings Community Church in Hickory Hill, right around the corner from where Tyree Nichols was murdered. I'm a former federal prosecutor and state prosecutor, so I understand the extent of these type of investigations. Investigations of this nature, as mentioned earlier, are heightened, and we want to make sure that our voices and our voices are heard, and that the federal investigators do what they are trained to do, and they are trained to conduct these heightened type of investigations. And this type of investigation, it could start in one area and end up in another area. It is an investigation of the Memphis Police Department. And you never know what could come of that when it starts there. And so we're looking forward that justice be served, and that a thorough investigation takes place, and we have confidence that it will take place, and we are going to be watchful. Those that are in the community are going to be watchful. Pastors, activists, politicians. There are many stakeholders, and we will be watching to make sure a thorough investigation is conducted.
I'm sorry, I didn't introduce myself. I am Latrina Davis Ingram, and I am also with the National Bar Association Legal Justice Task Force Chair. So we will also be, we have a website, so that would be one of the avenues that you will be able to contact and provide information. No, that's not the name of, this is just a working group that actually Representative Hardaway spearheaded.
Well, I hope all this goes right. So I've heard my name a few times. First, I want to express my appreciation to the team. There's been a lot of work that was done behind closed doors for a lot of time. It's too late for some of the victims of the unlawful policing that we know MPD is responsible for, and some of their collaborating first responders. But we feel confident now to the point that where we can exhale a little here in Memphis and know that we began to address the problem. And we are not going to solve the problem until we know the truth. There's no way for law enforcement to effectively deliver services to the community without trust. You can't get trust without transparency, because that's the only way that truth is proven. So this is going to give us the transparency that we need, so that when we talk about developing programs to address these issues, we'll know the source of these issues. We'll know what's generational. We'll know what is recent in terms of patterns and practices. we'll know how to better equip the public to work with law enforcement and with the justice system to give this community what it deserves, and that's safe and secure communities. We're not going to accept that that's normal for the violence that's on both sides of the badge. We're not going to accept that as normal. We know what our law enforcement officers take an oath for, to serve and protect, and there's a higher degree of responsibility, and thus there's corresponding accountability that we're going to be able to make sure is put in place. The direction that we go now is out from these meetings, small meetings, into the community, making sure that the community is heard. We've got to have testimony. You've got to trust us now. Some of you are not going to feel, some of you being our citizens, are not going to feel comfortable. If you don't, you can talk to one of your trusted messengers. That's one of us, or one of your elected officials, or one of your community leaders, your pastor. It's a better story if it's coming directly from you, but the task force, the working group, is going to be able to take your testimony, whether directly or third hand. With that, I'm going to ask that my colleague, Justin J. Pearson, would have some words.
Thank you so much, Representative Hardaway.
Excuse me, Representative Justin J. Pearson.
Very kind. Very kind. Well, look, the pattern and practice investigation that has been opened is a good step for our city, because we need the Memphis Police Department to be accountable for the actions that they are taking and the possible inequitable treatment for people in our communities. What we saw with the death of Tyree Nichols is that there is something wrong. There is something wrong with the way that this institution has been operating, and it is our responsibility to help change it. It is not saying that our police department is all bad or all wrong, that there's something wrong with our chief or anything like that. What it is saying is there are systematic and systemic problems that have to be addressed. And only if we acknowledge them will we be able to create the community that we need to live in. And that's going to require the community to stand up and to speak up about what has happened. We've got a lot of people in District 86 who have had really negative interactions with the police department. And it's time now for us to stand up and us to speak up to create the change that we need to see. Because Memphis can be a better place than it is, and it should be a place where you can interact with police officers and not end up dying. It should be a place where you are interacting with law enforcement and you actually just get a ticket if you do interact with them because your tail light's out and you don't end up in the hospital. That isn't the type of city that any of us want to live in, and the reality is a lot of times people have not come forward about the negative interactions they've had with police. And now is this moment, and now is this time where we've got to use our voice to create change. We all wished that we lived in a community and in a world where this wasn't a problem, right? We all wish that we were safe every time that we had an interaction with police, and that our community members and our constituents were safe, but that isn't true. I've got my own relative who has suffered seizures after having an interaction with police officers. This is a real problem that needs to be addressed, and it is a good sign that the Department of Justice has said that they're going to commit the resources necessary for our community to be able to solve and address this problem. What we don't want to see is for this report to come out and we get similar results as we've seen in other cities, which is that lots of money starts to go back to the police department, saying they just need more training. Police department has enough money. Our law enforcement's got enough resources. It's time that those resources be used equitably and that the police interactions with the community be more just. That's what we need to see. Not more money going to police, but that the way that they operate changes, and that the ways that our police officers operate with our community are different. Because some of these things don't require a person with a gun to tell you your tail light's out. Thank you all so much. If you have any questions for me or for us, please let me know, but I'll pass it back to Representative Hardaway.
Let me expound on what my colleague spoke to in terms of getting away from de-escalation by focusing on a new category, non-escalation. There are things that are done in the field which are those flash points. It could be from stopping the car to making an arrest. Those two things might have been unnecessary. It might have been something that you could follow through with, either through digital means or a summons or something else. So we've asked that the team would look at that and find a way that we can get away from these flash points where everyone's got to be stopped so that you can explore their trunk and get into what's under the front seat, etc., where you've got to take folks to jail for nonviolent crimes, hoping that they'll show up in court because you put them in jail and probably forced them to lose a day of work, etc., etc. Those things don't work. We know they don't work. That's why we're in the position we're in today. So we've asked them, as my colleague Justice J. Pearson said, we've asked them to take a new approach. Don't come in here telling us how to get back to the good old days. We want to do something different so we can get different results, and we can hold those folk that we give the authority to take liberty or life in the streets at their discretion under color of law. We want to make sure we have the very best who are employed by the city of Memphis, but we also want to make sure, and we spoke to the team about this, we want to know that the rest of these first responders in the other tiny towns around Memphis, those first responders in the county, those first responders in the contiguous states, Mississippi and Arkansas. So this is a beginning, this is a starting point, as Attorney Ingram said, but we've got a whole lot of steps to go, and we're going to take a lot of direction. But we want folks to start putting your notes together and getting ready to tell your story.
Sorry, are you guys taking questions now?
Yes.
So I just wanted to go a little bit deeper about that task force. I don't know if that's for you or who's heading that, who's a part of that. The name, because you said that name wasn't the task force name. So is that a question for you? Are you that task force?
All right, and I may have used task force interchangeably with the U.S. Department of Justice Civil Rights Division. Okay. So I'm sorry if I confuse the issue.
And I think
Our working group doesn't have a name.
right. It's more working group. I think that was the question is. It's just
About how many leaders would you say is part of this group? How many people were in that meeting today?
We can't tell you that.
You can't give us a number?
No, that's why we've been effective.
How many years back
are we going?
Listen, that was a good question that was asked in the group. There were pastors, there were elected leaders, and community members as well, and it was dozens of people. But one of the complaints that I did have was that it was not representative of the community. We need way more voices in order for us to create equitable change. And the reality is, it's good to have people who are elected. It's good to have people in our community who are pastors and who are running nonprofit organizations. But we have to have proximate people who have had these interactions with police officers and who have had these interactions with law enforcement that have not always been positive. And if you have had good experiences, they said they welcome those too. And so this isn't to isolate any of those voices. But the reality is we need to have way more people in a community where there are 600,000 of us, voices to be heard and to be engaged. And I hope, and you have one of these forms, I do too, that people do email, and you all should put this out there too, at community.memphis@usdoj.gov and call 888-473-3730. But as Representative Hardaway said, and as we all know, this is an initial meeting, but their responsibility is to increase the amount of people who are not just in this room, but who are across our community engaging in this conversation. Because this isn't going to be solved by 30 people. This is going to have to be solved by thousands of Tennesseans, thousands of Memphians, and people in Shelby County having the opportunity to have their voices heard. And if we're only staying in one room once, that's not going to get us to that resolution.
I don't know if this is something they expounded on with you guys. I didn't hear it in the press conference earlier. Say someone had a situation that happened back 10 years ago. Is that what is the time
They did say they want to hear from people who've had experiences back. It could be 10 or 20 years because that helps to get an understanding of the pattern and maybe where it came from. But they typically look at, was it 5 years? They typically look at 5 years when they're coming up with these investigations. What are the things, what are the policies, what are the instances that have happened over the last 5 years? But people who have had experiences 15 and 20 years ago were welcome to submit comments as well.
And can I say this?
Please.
When investigations are conducted, just so